to Career Q&A Live, a new series that UCSB Career Services has introduced to bring professionals and UCSB students together virtually to learn about different industries, ask questions, and make connections. So my name is Carol Huang, and I serve as the career counselor who specializes in working with students interested in the fields of education and human services. I'm happy to host today's conversation focused on how a UCSB alum created a career path working in education later in her career. And so our agenda today starts off with a quick intro about our special guest, followed by a few questions that I will ask, and then followed by questions that students may have. So students, you may submit your questions in the chat box on the screen at any time, and then I will check it periodically to ensure that we answer as many of them as we can. And so I also want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded, so future gauchos who couldn't tune in live today will have a chance to view our recorded session. So today we're talking to Barb Freeman, who graduated from UCSB. After she graduated, she moved to the Bay Area, where she worked part-time and completed enough accounting and finance courses at a community college to take her CPA exam. She joined Deloitte, a Big Five accounting firm, when they recruited several staff members with a social services background. And at Deloitte, she volunteered at a local classroom and realized that her true calling was working in education. So she returned to graduate school at UCLA and taught a couple of different positions in Los Angeles before returning to Santa Barbara. So she now works at Santa Barbara City College as the Learning Resources Center Supervisor, where she oversees operation, manages their budget, and works closely with staff and students to provide learning support. So thank you, Barb, for being with us today. And I'm going to jump right into the first question to start our conversation. Okay, so question one is, how did you get started in your career as it relates to your education experiences and the skills that you have gained?
Okay, so you mentioned briefly some of it, but essentially I was a communication and psychology double major when I was at UCSB, and I enjoyed my time there greatly, but when I graduated, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do with that, and I ended up moving to the Bay Area, and at the time, in talking to my family, my dad actually had worked in finance, and he said, oh, well, have you thought about taking what you've done, which essentially focused on writing and speaking? And he said, what about taking some more practical type of courses and thinking about maybe accounting or finance? And so I said, well, maybe I'll do that. I was working part-time at that point. While I was in the Bay Area, I was working at a law firm, and they did some investment advising as well for both athletes and some other high net worth individuals. And so while I was doing that, I ended up going back and taking enough accounting classes to take the CPA exam. And so I took the CPA exam, and that was quite a challenge, but passed a couple parts at a time, and ended up then getting connected while I was taking my courses. I took them at a community college in the Bay Area, actually College of Marin, and they connected me with an accounting firm in the city. When I say in the city, I mean in San Francisco, Deloitte & Touche. And Deloitte was really interested in getting people who had some accounting knowledge, but really had more of a social services background. And I think that their goal was really to get people who could work well with clients and also work well in terms of writing, because working in public accounting, really in audit, not specifically in audit, so I didn't mention that, but I worked on the audit side, not the tax side. But basically I would go out to a client and I would have to interview any number of staff about what they were doing, what had been going on, whether that was in the past quarter or the previous year. And I had to be able to take what they told me and succinctly summarize exactly what they said and put that into my work papers. So essentially all of that came together for us to be able to sign off on people's financial statements. And then I guess, what was the second part of your question again?
Just like how you kind of got started in your career, but we can go ahead and move like towards like talking more about, can you describe what it was like to transition from like your accounting career to working in like education, how that kind of came about, and like now your work at a community college?
Absolutely. So one of the things that Deloitte encouraged was for people to be involved in the community. And one of the opportunities that I took was to volunteer in a classroom. I volunteered in a sixth grade classroom, and I was so inspired by working with students. And I also was, I would say, inspired to change as well, because the teacher that I was paired with didn't really exhibit the level of care that I would have hoped in a classroom, which encouraged me to think about, okay, if you went back and you did something in education, what would you want to do? I thought, well, if I taught in a classroom, I might want to teach either at the elementary or the middle school level. So I ended up looking for programs that focused on social justice, and they specifically worked in low-income communities who sometimes had a lack of qualified teachers in their schools. And the program that appealed to me was the UCLA Teacher Education Program. And so the way that program worked was, in the first year, you were taking courses, and in the second year, you were, actually, let me back up for a second. At the end of your first year, they connected you with various schools throughout the district. And at the time, it was in LAUSD, which is Los Angeles Unified School District, huge district. And they connected with schools to bring a few people. They called us really a cohort, 2 or 3 people from each cohort into various schools, so that you had somebody to connect with to try to implement some of the things that you were learning in the classroom. And then we were also taking classes in the evenings and on the weekends during that second year. So I would say that experience really changed me in a lot of ways for the positive. I worked for 4 years in the elementary education, and then I was actually drawn back to UCLA, where I worked at something called a lab school on their campus. And this gave me an opportunity to work with a team. So there were 3 of us who supported 2 classrooms, and we were really trying innovative practice in the classroom. It was also research-based, so we had some researchers on campus who would come in and do studies in our classrooms. We had a lot of support in terms of technology and trying to make sure that we could get the newest ideas into the classroom. And then we also brought in teachers from various districts in Los Angeles to observe, so that they could then take that practice back to their schools. So it's been a long road. I ended up back in Santa Barbara because my parents retired here after I went to Santa Barbara, UCSB. And that's how I first got my job at Santa Barbara City College.
And then can you share with us like about your current job at Santa Barbara City College and what you do, and like what a typical day might look like, and how your background and experiences have kind of like been informing the work that you're doing?
Yes. So I started out at SBCC as a tutor in the Writing Center. And so that gave me a part-time opportunity. And that's how I got to know my area, which, as you mentioned, is the Learning Resources Center. So we are in the same building as the library, but not connected to the library. We do not only the Writing Center, but we also house a lot of computers and a couple classrooms. We host workshops, and tutors from multiple disciplines across campus come and tutor in our area. So that very first year that I was there, I worked, as I said, as a tutor. The opportunity came up to be supervisor. They wanted someone who had experience with budgets and who had experience with hiring, which I had done in a couple of other roles that we haven't really talked about today. But that's something that I get a chance to do. Not every day, I don't work on hiring, but I do deal with budgets and hiring. I still tutor students. I still do the outward facing service to students as well by working, you know, in our various service areas, whether that's the front counter area. But I also tutor students on the computers if they have questions. So the main goal is that I'm out and about, out of my office, and trying to make sure that I'm connecting with students to find out how we can best serve them.
Awesome. I wanted to remind students in the room that if you wanted to ask questions, please feel free to type it into the chat box. Okay, so I'm going to ask the next question, which is, what advice do you have for UCSB students who are exploring this area of work, wanting to either work in like education or like, for example, at a community college? What kind of advice would you have for anyone who's like starting out or just starting out in their careers in general? And then what skills or knowledge do you think is like most important for them to kind of prepare for entry-level work?
Well, I think one of the things that I would say is that you need to be open in the way that you think about education. I didn't anticipate that I would go back and be an elementary school teacher. I had very little. A lot of people say, "Oh, I had a lot of babysitting experience, so I thought I'd be a great elementary school teacher." You can think about some of the things you've done in your past, but just be open to opportunities as they arise. One of the things that you can do, you can actually volunteer in your community. So if you're thinking about a career in education, there are organizations, and I'm sure Carol can talk to you about some of those. One of them, I think, maybe is Partners in Education. Carol, are you familiar with them?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So there are places that you can sign up and volunteer in a classroom, and I would recommend that you volunteer at different levels so that you get a chance to see. And this, when I say volunteer, I should also clarify and say not just a one-time event, but if you can continue to go to that classroom week after week for, you know, at least a few weeks, so that you get to know the teacher and also get to know the students in that classroom. There's a possibility. I know when I was a teacher, I was always thrilled when I had volunteers in my classroom, because it meant when I was working with 30 students that there might be one person who could take a small group and pull them out and work with them. So just think about those types of opportunities that arise. One other thing that I would mention is if you are working in any job right now, it doesn't matter where you're working, if you could, you've been there for a while, you want to take on that opportunity to train other people in the workplace, let your manager know, hey, this is something that I'm interested in doing. We have a new hire on board. Would you let me go over some new procedures with them or cover certain portions with them? And I'm sure your manager would be thrilled with the idea that, you know, they get the new worker gets an opportunity to connect with somebody there as well, not just with the manager.
Cool. All right. So I am going to go ahead and ask another question for you. And I want to, so earlier you were talking a little bit more about like social justice. So, and like you mentioned sort of like your desire to like move from like accounting to education. You discovered you really liked it. Can you kind of tell us about like what inspired you or who inspired you to kind of like pursue this type of work? And like, how did you know that it was the right fit for you?
I think I was initially inspired by the volunteering that I had done, because I recognized that there were students who were not being served well. And I wanted to find out, okay, how could I, particularly in elementary education, where I'm just going to come up with an example here, but in a lot of the grade levels and a lot of the different schools, they focused primarily on math and English, and there was really a push to get students to a certain grade level, performing at a certain grade level. And while I know that that's important, that math and English are important, it was also very important to focus on areas like science, which encouraged critical thinking and inquiry-based instruction, where I wasn't standing up in front of a class teaching science and they weren't reading about science in a textbook, but they were actually doing science. And so for me, it was reaching out, trying to figure out, okay, what else exists beyond my little classroom right now with all 30 of us? How could I apply for grants? How could I do training during my off time? So I spent my summers typically going to workshops and to longer term training events that very often would fund projects in your classroom if you were willing to write to them and let them know what was going on and let them know about progress. So I think for me, it's just trying to make sure that we were reaching out in many different ways and using more practical applications in the classroom as well.
And then, looking back in your career thus far, like, what do you feel like is something you wish you had known before, like, starting it?
I think that I always was hesitant to take a risk. I was hesitant to reach out and ask for help until I found people who said to me, you absolutely need to ask for help. Let somebody know if you're not sure what you're doing. Ask questions, and you can do research on your own. It's not the same thing as connecting with a person. And sometimes that can feel like you're admitting that you don't know something, but you really do get a lot more out of it.
Oh, thank you. And then let's go back a little bit more and talk about like sort of like what you feel like in the work that you've done so far, like what has been sort of like the most rewarding and also like challenging parts of like maybe like your current role or like working in sort of like the educational field?
I think that you're always going to find that the field of education is struggling with a lack of funding. So I think that's one of the challenges that, I see even in my current role. We want to support students, but we don't have as much funding as we could to bring on more tutors, for example. So it's really thinking about what serves students well. And how do we reframe our practice? Another piece of that would be thinking about technology. And this is the perfect example of what we're doing right now. When we're thinking about how do we serve our online students, how do we make sure that we're taking care of people in the evenings and on weekends when they need more support and we're not open. So it's being open to the idea that you're still giving that opportunity to connect, but you may be doing it in a different way. So being flexible, that's what it comes down to. That's the word of the day. It's all about flexibility.
Yeah, and adaptability. So.
Right, absolutely. Especially in an ever-changing environment like education, whether that's happening at the state level or the local level, mm-hmm. or the national level for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about like what sort of advice you would have for students who are thinking about because there's roles in education, as you have mentioned, you went back to grad school and all that kind of stuff. Can you talk a little bit more about like sort of your educational experiences, because you got your bachelor's degree and you also had done a lot of, it sounds like, professional development type of activities, as well as pursued your like your master's. And so can you talk a little bit more about like what that process was like applying for grad school, sorry, looking for those opportunities to like learn more so you can kind of, I guess, do more? I don't know if that's the right question.
I think that you need to think about, at least when I was applying to graduate school, it wasn't just about the location of the grad school. You really need to look at the program itself. So what I found was that visiting and connecting with people who are in the program was really helpful. So just asking someone who's a first-year student, do you have a few minutes to meet with me? And typically there's someone in the program office. If you let them know that you're coming for a visit, they can connect you with someone to talk to. But I think, again, getting that experience, asking if you could sit in on a class as a visitor. Sometimes people are okay with that. Sometimes they would prefer that doesn't happen. But even just saying, could I sit in for just a half hour to see what it's like? I think that doing that at a variety of campuses will help you figure out, is this the right fit for you?
Cool. And so I want to remind students that if you have any questions, feel free to put it into the chat box, and I will take a look at them and I will keep on asking questions. So we only have a couple more minutes left, but I wanted to ask, so can you tell us about what potential like strengths or skills you feel like people who want to pursue like this type of work, or just to be successful in their careers, like what kind of skills and strengths do you recommend that like students early on in their career build?
So I think in terms of strengths, when we're reaching out and we're hiring, we're looking for people who are strong at communicating. So that means communicating with students, that means communicating across different departments at the college. So I work with a variety of departments in many, many meetings. And so that means not just communication in person, but also written communication. So how your emails come across, that can make a difference. I think it's also important to be really organized. So on time, I mean, I'm always at work early. You're never going to see me there late. You know, technically, I guess, my day starts when our center opens, which is at 8 o'clock. And I'm typically there no later than 7:45 just to make sure that things are set and ready. That also means closing out the end of the day, prepping for the next day so that you know what's coming. I think in terms of other skills, it would be trying things, joining committees, that when people ask for volunteers to do something, that you think, even if it's outside of your comfort zone, you stretch yourself a bit. And that's a good way to open yourself up to see if that's an area that you might enjoy, and you might meet a mentor that way as well.
So I have another question for you from a student, and student is an accounting major, and the student isn't sure how to bring their interest in education together with their academic path. And what would you recommend as a next step to see if like a career in education is a path that one should pursue?
Well, I'll go back to what I said before, which was the possibility of volunteering in a classroom, because I think you can't really make a decision about being a teacher per se unless you're in a classroom. Another idea, if you're trying to think about how to link accounting or finance with any kind of job, understand that most jobs include some kind of budgeting in some way. If you have any access to spending, you typically need to take a look at, this is the amount that someone gave me, and this is what I want to prioritize in terms of my purchases. So I'm not quite sure if I answered that.
I think so. But I guess like a follow-up question could be like, so if one is thinking about the field of education, is not so sure that they want to be a teacher, but is interested in sort of like research or analytical roles, or just like other roles in general in education, have you had experience, or do you have like thoughts about what type of roles those might be?
Hmm. Well, I would tell you this, that a lot of campuses do have um, those types of positions. And one area, this is brand new for us, we just started using something called Academia, which is software which essentially tracks the students, the number of students who come in to visit tutors. But that's just an example of a link with IT. And so thinking about maybe if you're interested in different types of roles other than teaching, you might just look at even the job boards at various colleges just to see what types of open positions exist. And then think about, okay, who's the hiring manager? Is that somebody that I might want to schedule a quick call with? I mean, I know for me, when people reach out to me, I'm happy to say, oh yeah, I could spend, 15 minutes, 30 minutes on a call with you, just talking about what I do. Typically, we do want to schedule that. It's a little bit more difficult for me with my day, just to answer those types of questions on the fly. But if you reached out to people on LinkedIn, that's another way. I mean, that's how Carol and I connected. She reached out and said, hey, I'm interested in hearing more about what you do, and you might be a good speaker with this program that I'm putting together. So just, again, try to push yourself out of your comfort zone. And typically professionals are happy to help.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to mention that because we talked about a lot of different things today, right? Like we talked about things related to like getting teaching experience, and UCSB does have opportunities to help you get teaching experiences if that's what you're interested in, like sort of like volunteering in classroom and that kind of stuff. We also have resources to help you kind of explore if you're interested in doing things like, educational technology, or for example, doing like research like in an educational like sense where there are a lot of positions where people do like educational research type of work. And then even now, like because data and analytics and stuff is kind of like becoming really important in sort of the world of education, having that is very important. And so I would say that there definitely are roles and responsibilities and just like new changes to what's possible in the field of education. And like a lot of different types of skills are needed. And so if this is something that you are interested in, like feel free to come into career services and we can always have a discussion about it as well. With that said, I think this is a very important question. So I'm gonna push a few more minutes so that you can answer this one, but I think this is a great question. How easy is it to change direction if one doesn't end up enjoying the type of work that they have done, or how easy it is to kind of like pivot directions in terms of like transitioning from one area to the next, since I know that you've had experience kind of transitioning different environments and work titles and all that kind of stuff.
That's a very nice way of saying that I've changed my mind a lot and I've gone after what I wanted. I think if you have the core skills, that those can work in any field. And those core skills are the same things that we've already talked about, which are connecting with people. So that public speaking and also writing skills. I think that if you can build those while you're at UCSB, that can benefit you in any job. So let me give you an example of that. If you're working on, let's say, your cover letter and your resume, that's the very first thing that people see. And so if you work with people like Carol or her colleagues in the Career Center, she can help you, or they can help you hone, okay, what is it that you're trying to say? What do you want to get across into a future employer? Because that's really going to make a difference.
Thank you. So this is kind of all the time that we have for today. I want to thank our guests again for taking the time out of your busy work week to chat with us. So in the coming days, I'll send an email to the students who tuned in live with our speakers' contact information so that the students can follow up. And then I think this is a very important step to take as a college student, as we keep on talking about like just reaching out and growing your network. And then whether that is through LinkedIn, whether it's through a phone call, whether it's in person, just making those connections and hearing the stories of other people who have kind of like paved a path already is really helpful, and just to find a connection to get some advice. And so thank you so much, Barb, for being with us today, and I thank you all for tuning in. All right, well, have a great evening.
Okay, bye.